Hello everybody, Dokkan Assets here. Today we are back with another animation analysis video, and I'm sure you guys were anticipating these two videos coming. Today we are going to be taking a look at Cell, and then tomorrow we are going to be taking a look at Gohan and Goku, of course, back for another animation analysis video. I am very excited to get into these. There are some things in here that I was very impressed by, and there were some things in here, and while I was just kind of like, so as per usual, we are going to play through the animation one time at regular speed, watch through it, and then we are going to dissect that bad boy. Now, I will say, it is kind of interesting considering that obviously his first form you're probably going to see the most, because obviously the first form, you know, is typically the one that you use the most because you don't see the final forms until later in these fights, right? It's interesting to me that they made his essays the most simple, because it's so funny to me, because it's like they made perfect form Cell's animations the best because it's like he's the final form, but at the same time you see them the least. So I don't know, I think that's kind of funny. But anyway, obviously we have the semi-perfect Cell essay here, which I will say, ooh, the pinks in that essay, super good, if I do say so myself. That is also awful, but like it looks great from the perspective of, like, you know, it's a good animation. Terrible just like feeling that I get from watching it though. Alright, so obviously we have the super attack animation for Cell here. I was kind of wondering what they were going to choose, honestly, because I feel like at this point they've exhausted Cell, but that is a pretty good choice for SA. And then obviously we have the Great Ape transformation-esque Great Ape. I guess you just call it Giant transformation, but he's not even really a giant, just the buff Cell transformation. Oh man, it looks so weird, and I know a lot of people were definitely not expecting this one in the roster. It is kind of weird to me, I will say, from just like an overall perspective. Oh, by the way, that's it. That one is really short. I don't know why they were like, they made such a big deal out of buff Cell, and then his essay is like 2 seconds long. It's shorter than, I think, even the Imperfect Cell essay, which is just so weird. But to be fair, I guess it is a giant ape transformation essay, and those are usually really short, so that also makes sense. It's just kind of weird to me, though, for a transforming Cell unit that I'm assuming is supposed to be like, you know, Frieza and Goku and Vegeta. They only have, you know, imperfect, semi-perfect, perfect form, and then they have buff, and they don't actually have perfect Cell. Just kind of interesting to me. Anyway, let's go ahead and take a look. Oops, I didn't want to loop it. Or I didn't want to unloop it, rather. Let's go ahead and take at it at the slowed down speed. So I will say, first of all, I am a pretty big fan of Imperfect Cell, as weird as that sounds. Not you, big lips! I'm a pretty big fan of Imperfect Cell just because I think his design is so cool. It's the perfect, like, sort of menacing, disgusting design, if I do say so myself. And I think in terms of nailing that look, especially with the sort of Dragon Ball Z Cell Saga style, I think they absolutely nailed the look of Cell here. All the colors are on point, the shading is on point with the little bits that are a little bit lighter than the rest of everything. Looks really cool. So first, obviously, we have a cut, obviously, from this shot where Cell sort of appears on the scene to... it is kind of a weird cut because they pan out a little bit, but then he's way far in the background. It is definitely a little bit jarring. It's not that bad in the actual, like, you know, animation itself when it's full-fledged. But looking at it like this, it does look a little bit funny. So obviously we have him charge forward, which I actually think this animation works pretty well. He does have a little bit of movement here. It's not too crazy because obviously he's so far away for most of this, right? But then when he gets in, you can see that there is a little bit of movement on the head here. But it is kind of funny that he comes to a full stop. I do believe that that's actually what happens. I haven't watched the scene in a little bit, but they did a good job sort of getting that right down, where it looks like he's about to charge at the enemy, and then he immediately is just like, ah! You know, it comes to a screeching halt. So that is pretty cool, if I do say so myself. Now, we have this tail animation here, which is actually really interesting. At first, when I saw this, I was a little bit confused because I didn't actually see the tail. But then I was like, oh, that's what's punching Piccolo right now, is the tail. This change in perspective is also really interesting. I don't, like, mind it that much. I'm wondering if they did this because then obviously it's less animation for them to do, because obviously since it's far out, they don't have to do as much drawing with, you know, like the tail animation, right? Because obviously it would have had to been a lot higher quality assets if they would have had it from this angle. But anyway, obviously we have the cut here, which I definitely don't think is too bad of a transition, honestly. And I do like the tail flicking Piccolo, right? I do think it is really cool. However, the one thing that I'm not really a fan of here is occasionally, right, they have the explosion effect appear before the tail sometimes. Like this one, right? It explodes and then the tail hits. I'm assuming that that's an error on the animator's part because that feels really weird, right? Like maybe it's just because he strikes there and then it's like remnants of him striking there and then he strikes there again. But I feel like they should have just had it like turn off in the middle of it. I'm not sure. Very interesting on that specific one. But overall, I think the tail hitting Piccolo looks pretty good. The actual animation on the tail is quick and snappy, which is good for what's going on here. Obviously, a barrage of tail strikes. I think the tail looks cool in the way that they give it the motion lines as well. Definitely pretty neat. Obviously, the motion lines in the background also help. Then we have that one final hit before Cell actually wraps around, or I guess just whips around would be a better way to say it. He looks kind of goofy in this shot, though, I will say. His face looks like a little bit bootleggy, but I guess it is a little bit hard to draw him when he's so small because his face is already so ugly. And in a good way, by the way. Like, you know, Imperfect Cell is just ugly. Alright, so obviously we do have a very sharp change in position. It was a little bit hard to notice it in the full animation, but y'all know that I'm not the biggest fan when it's like a hard transition of poses there. I will say this one isn't as bad just because obviously, you know, this is supposed to be a quick motion as he's flicking Piccolo away. So I think that this definitely looks okay from there to there. But in the beginning transition from pose to pose, I do wish there was a little bit more. So obviously we have this hit effect here, not hit from Universe 6. Then he hits the building, which the smoke effect is pretty cool. And obviously we have, this is actually, funny enough, even though I think that all the animations are pretty, like, good, right? I don't think that any of them are necessarily bad. This one might be my favorite just because, like I said, my favorite form is Imperfect Cell. And obviously from TFS, this is so funny too. So I think that they absolutely kill it on the electricity here, and the shading on Cell's hand looks perfect. Really, really cool the way that they did that. They also nailed the special beam cannon charging up effect too, with these small bits of electricity sort of sparking off of it. I think that that is really, really cool. Definitely did a good job with that. Obviously, we have the transition to the card art, which, by the way, looks a lot better now that we've seen all of the card arts for this character. Alright, so then we obviously have Cell fire the special beam cannon here, which I think this scene also looks really good. They did a great job as well on the special beam cannon, making it sort of look like it's rotating like how it should. Definitely a pretty cool look. And then we obviously have it strike through the building, which I actually think is a pretty cool angle. Definitely a very nice angle, if I do say so myself, because it's not like too often I feel like you get to see this. But yeah, they do a good job of animating that. It definitely looks really close to the special beam cannon. And then we have a pretty good explosion effect at the end. Yeah, I think, honestly, like, everything after the punches and kicks, I'm a huge fan of. This is crazy, by the way. I just want to say, the first time I watched this, I was a little bit terrified. And I don't even think, like Imperfect Cell is kind of scary, because, of course, he's supposed to be this ugly bug monster. But when I saw this man raise behind 17 for the first time, I was like, ooh! Wow! That is pretty horrifying, you know, and the fact that they have his eyes glow as well for this, which is a detail that you might not catch if you're looking at this super quick, because obviously that scene is not on the screen for too long. Very, very cool. Alright, so we're here on something that I don't like, and we're going to see a little bit more of this later on too. Instead of having a proper animation for this opening, we just have the asset fade into another asset of the tail being open. Y'all know that I am not the biggest fan of when they do this sort of thing. I think the tail expanding definitely looks fine. But the fading assets, not a fan, right? And obviously that's not how it looked in the anime. It looked nice and disgusting with the tail opening. This scene, I think, looks actually pretty good with 17 looking horrified. And then obviously you have the where it goes right over him, right? basically covers him up. Now, this looks good in the beginning here where he's getting sucked in, but like, I know that I've seen this sometimes in the anime where they do this sort of fade thing, but it just feels so, like, I don't know, cheap to me, because I know that I've seen it in the anime where Cell drinks these people alive, right? And absorbs them, where the tail's like, you know, and does that disgusting sound, right? So it is kind of a shame to see that instead of actually animating it, expanding, and taking 17, you know, into him, that they just chose to fade it. Rather than actually animate it, sort of sucking him in. Even here, when they're showing the back, right, they sort of just have it fade with the last couple of sections that, you know, before he actually enters into Cell's body. Kind of unfortunate, you know, it is what it is. I'm sure that that was probably just to save a little bit of time on these animations and cut some corners, but, you know, do wish it was a little bit better. Now this section, however, I think is really cool. So obviously we have Cell's PNG sort of grow a little bit here. There is a little bit of motion too. If you see the hands, they are moving a little bit rather than just like, you know, expanding. Now the animation of him like growing is just kind of okay, like that's sort of whatever. I don't really know what else they would have done with that to represent that growing, because obviously then they fade to white, right? But what comes after this section, oh man, I have always been a huge fan of when Semi-Perfect Cell is first born, I guess you would say, and they have these like white effects sort of go across his body, right? If you'll actually show them for me, there you go, thank you. Right? I really like these effects of him sort of like getting this shiny new coat of paint, so to speak, and oh, man, I think they did a really good job of it here in Dokkan. I think they did a great job of representing that look, because I feel like no other character has this specific, like, I don't know if I want to call it key or what, but like just this weird white shine that sort of goes over them, right? I definitely don't really see that on any other Dragon Ball character throughout the history of the anime. You can tell me in the comment section if there is something like that, but I very vividly remember this sort of effect from when Cell first absorbs 17 and goes semi-perfect form. So it's really cool to see that they did a very nice representation of that in Dokkan. Obviously, the electricity looks cool too. I will say, though, a part of that, right, despite obviously me really liking those effects with like the white shine on Semi-Perfect Cell, I will say this animation is kind of underwhelming from the beginning part where Cell just sort of expands a little bit to them just panning up his body, right? I understand that obviously because it's a transformation animation, they don't want it to be like insanely long, because of course it is just supposed to be quite literally that, a transitional animation. It's not supposed to be a super attack where it's anything crazy long, but it still would have been cool to have like a couple angles or something like that, you know, rather than just sliding up the PNG of Mr. Cell himself. But either way, I digress. Definitely pretty cool. This, oh man, okay, so before we even get into the animation here, the effect of Cell's tail sliding by the screen, this almost makes up for the animation of the transformation being a little bit lackluster, because this section is so neat with Cell's tail sliding by the screen. I think they did a great job representing that, and definitely a very cool angle as well. Obviously, as he sort of goes, you know, and it flies by the screen and then pans up to him smiling. There is a little bit of a fade on the smile. It is kind of hard to catch in the actual animation, I feel like. But yeah, unfortunately, it's not just him actually growing a smile. It's him just fading his smile into existence. But again, I assume that's cutting corners a little bit on their end. Oh, I didn't even notice that one, though, the first time I watched it. Okay, look at that fade. Ooh, that's mad ugly, bro. Yeah, I am definitely not a fan of that. Yeah, that's kind of unfortunate. I will say, there also are some really weird cuts here. Like, I guess they sort of mask this by having it be, like, close to the same pose. By the way, look at the quality difference on these assets to these assets. Definitely you could tell what they prioritized here. Yeah, very interesting transition there. Alright, so obviously we have a quick... as well, another sort of just like immediate change in pose from getting ready to fire Ki Blast to firing it, which this one I don't mind as much, because obviously this is supposed to be quick, snappy, and like he's getting ready to just launch the Ki Blast immediately. The Ki Blast looks pretty cool too. The cloud in the background kind of looks like a puff of smoke, which I don't know if that was intended, but Definitely love the movement on the Ki Blast as well. It's always nice when they actually give the Ki Blast some life rather than just making it a circle, rather than making it a Dragon Ball Heroes Ki Blast, I guess you would say, right? It actually has some motion, and I really like the effects outside the actual blast itself too. Definitely very cool. Explosion as well is definitely very nice with some of those effects coming back. Well, obviously we have Cell teleporting in. Oh my gosh, there is a lot of fading here. Oh mama. Okay, so we have him sort of looking at this screenshot just kind of like hurts my soul a little bit. I'm not gonna lie. We have him transition from obviously looking at 16 to getting ready to use his tail here. Or so it seems, before it transitions into another punch. Like I said, y'all know that I'm not really a fan of the punch, but I will say this, or the punch, the fade rather. But this angle, wow, that is a really cool angle with obviously being at the end of Cell's tail. I definitely really like that. And interesting how they have it expand. This one, I will say, even though this is also a stinky fade, I think that this one's probably a little bit harder to notice, and this one works a little bit better, I feel like. But yeah, definitely a pretty cool angle. Good cut there as well. And I think another good choice in cut, obviously going from Cell's face, right, to the fist. I definitely think, like, that's a cut that makes a little bit more sense from a transitional standpoint than a couple of the ones we've seen here. Like, maybe they could have done something here where, you know, they have it go from, like, they pan down from his face to his hand. But I don't think every animation obviously needs to be like that. But I definitely think that that one is a good choice for a cut. So obviously we cut to the, I didn't even mean to say that, my bad, to the card art. Very cool, by the way. You always love to see when Dokkan gives you a first person POV. We don't get these too often in Dokkan essays. So it's cool the once in a while that they do them. It's nice that I saw that in there. The hands look pretty good in the animation in motion. They look a little bit slow in the actual slow-mo, but they look good in practice. Obviously, the pink looks really cool from a color scheme perspective. Definitely a very nice sort of shading job by the guys on the coloring team for the essays. Definitely very cool. Obviously, we have the Ki Blast sort of form in his hand, making a little field goal around 16, which is pretty neat. I will say I do kind of wish the Ki Blasts were a little bit better animated, or like more animated, but I think after that, where you can see this, which is that classic sort of effect texture on Ki for Dragon Ball Z Ki Blast, definitely a cool thing to use there. Then obviously we have Cell raise the Ki Blast above his head. This one I'm like kind of not a fan of. I love the coloring, but as the Ki Blast is raising, like I feel like his hands should be in a different position. I don't know, maybe I'm just in the wrong on that one, because I remember I did see a comment on the Kid Buu video that somebody thought I was interpreting it wrong, which I did say in that video. I was like, maybe I am interpreting the way that he's holding it wrong. But, I don't know, it just feels a little bit awkward to me in the way that he's holding the blast there. The tail movement is also interesting that it goes from there to there so quickly. But yeah, obviously we have him fire the blast off, and then of course we have these sort of motion lines to represent him actually chucking it with a very nice smoke cloud at the end, actually. Definitely looks very, very solid. Alright, so now we have the animation of him absorbing 18. 18's assets here look very, very good. Obviously, we have Cell screaming. I like that this is already open, because then they don't have to do any fade sort of thing. And as much as I hate to say it, because this animation is so, like, disgusting to look at, because it's, like, grotesque, I think they did a very good job with this one, with 18 struggling and actually being absorbed into Cell. And then, obviously, the final... Right, they did definitely a very... Oh, whoops, sorry, did not mean to skip ahead that much. They did a very good job representing that once 18's body is basically like all the way in there. When they finally, you know, get the final suck, right? And she gets sucked in there like that with the motion lines. Definitely a very nice touch on the animation. Because I know a lot of the time when Cell absorbs people whole, right? It's like that final bit is just like a swoop, and he gets him in there. Very, very nice animation. Obviously, the tail expanding and contracting where it should looks really, really good. This animation is how they should have done the tail for Imperfect Cell, right? Like, I think that the tail part here is literally, like, perfect, right? How it's, like, bigger, obviously, you know, when 18 is first getting in to him, right? And obviously, it's just finishing absorbing her, right? and then going into that small state. Very, very nice. And it's so cool that they're able to accomplish that with just a bunch of PNGs. Like, this is so much better, just this tiny section, than that entire fade part where they have, you know, 17 getting absorbed. Really, really cool. It almost makes you wish they would have finished it, like having 18 go all the way in rather than just them transitioning to this. Though I will say, this is definitely one of my favorite parts of the animations as well. This is another thing that I feel like is exclusive to Cell, and maybe it's just because he has the spots, right? So that they're able to do this sort of thing. But the glow and the weird, like, white effects shooting out from almost like the cracks of his body, right, is something that is definitely exclusive to Semi-Perfect Cell. And I think that on this section here, they absolutely nail those effects. I think they did such a good job of representing this look from the anime, because this was definitely something that stuck out to me in my mind from the animation when Cell absorbs 18 in the anime. Very, very good job on that part too. Now, we do see basically like a silhouette of Cell here, which is interesting that they go from that. Like representing it properly to representing it like this. Though, I do think that he actually does look like this at some point. It's just kind of jarring going from that like really cool, crazy animation to this immediately. But I definitely don't think it looks too bad. And then obviously we have the intro of Mr. Cell himself. Again, it's kind of unfortunate that like this isn't more detailed. And I understand again that it is a transition or a transformation animation rather. So it shouldn't be like insane in terms of, you know, like showing all these different angles and stuff like that, but I do wish that it was a little bit more detailed overall instead of just having him stand there and have the funny motion lines go. Anyhow, we transition to his actual super attack, which funny enough I think is probably like my least favorite essay out of all of them, which is kind of ironic considering I know like Perfect Cell is what people really like from this. Alright, so we have him standing in the distance, which is definitely a decent shot here. They just compress his PNG to represent him gearing up to move forward. That's so funny. Look at him. He just gets smaller. That's so funny. So obviously we have, it is kind of jarring. Here's the thing, right? They do this a lot where they have like a far away pose and it sort of moves from a stationary position to getting ready to move. I don't know how they could make this more fluid, honestly, but like, it is kind of jarring even when you're watching it in full speed, seeing the character go from this to this immediately, considering that obviously they get so much bigger and your perspective is kind of ruined, right? Like it takes you out of the moment. It's like instead of looking at this like, oh, this is Cell about to come towards Gohan, you're like, oh, this is an animation of Cell coming towards Gohan. Now, I will say, this part is really cool. I definitely like when he actually leaves the ground, right, and jumps forward. I do wish there was a little bit more in between right there and there. But once he's actually moving forward, even though it is pretty quick, I definitely really, really like this part. Very, very nice. The little smile at the end is also very cool. And then the fade, oh, so good. It's so good. I love this part right here. It is such a nice touch to this animation. Look at how scary he looks as well here with just the whited out eyes. Very cool. Obviously having Cell teleport in front of Gohan is really, really cool. Getting ready to smack that bad boy up. Obviously pulling back before hitting the enemy sprite. Very interesting transition as well here, or I guess you would say jump cut. Kind of like this one, I think definitely isn't as noticeable in terms of like cutting from one scene to another when it's in full motion, but I feel like I've never seen it before where it's like a cut from the front to the back. There has to be, right? I don't know, it feels like I've never really seen that before in this particular pose. Something about the pose is kind of getting me. This also looks really good, I will say. Him actually hitting the enemy definitely looks really, really nice here. I think they did a good job animating that part. This is so jarring though. Holy cow. I guess it's because he's moving fast, but like going from this position, because it almost looks like he's like sitting on the ground, or it's like poorly animated that he's sitting on the ground, even though I understand he just finished following through on the hit. Going from there to there is like, whoo! Wow, that is a jump for sure. The kick is definitely pretty cool. I do wish that there was a little bit more in between, where are we, like here and here, right, with Cell's entire position. But I think the actual transition from him winding up to the final kick is actually pretty good, because obviously, you know, you want it to be quick and snappy, but when he's finally, like, letting his leg kind of come back around is sort of when it looks a little bit jarring. Alright, so obviously we have him flying up from the ground. This part looks fine. Is it just me, or does he look really stiff? Like, that was the kind of the what I was getting when I was watching the Perfect Cell animations from this. And that's kind of still how I feel with Cell himself in perfect form. I feel like he's really stiff. Not just in the fact that there's not a lot of, like, frames in between him switching positions, but just, like, even when he's throwing this punch, it still feels really stiff. And I feel like there's something a little bit off about his face. I don't know. Oh, ooh, hold on. Let's go back and get that. Interesting. So that fade, I feel like, isn't as bad because it's just turning his head. That one definitely, I feel like, flows a little bit better. But yeah, I don't know. He just feels very stiff. This one, I will say, is probably the easiest, like, best part of the Perfect Cell animations for sure. Or he's obviously moving his hand forward. I definitely like this pan up too. This is a very nice shot of Cell too, just like the way that he looks too. I like this transition. I think this is definitely a good, like, shot of him opening his hand. However, I wish that there was more animation between this and then this, funny enough. Even though I think him going closed hand to semi-open hand is fine. I wish when he went full open palm there was a little bit more. I don't know. Maybe it's just me nitpicking, which, I mean, that is the entire point of the series, right? But it definitely felt a little bit jarring there for sure. Alright, so obviously we have the transition to the Carter here, which is kind of unfortunate because obviously I don't know how they would incorporate this same pose into every single one of these essays, but it is a little bit jarring going from that to that. Then we obviously have Cell opening his mouth. I feel like even here his face looks a little bit off to me. I don't know. But obviously we have him just opening his mouth too. Funny enough, I almost would have preferred a fade there just because it feels a little bit funny with him just opening it immediately. But this is a cool shot here. Obviously getting a little bit of a waist shot where we have him charging up the actual Ki Blast. Definitely a very cool angle there for sure. Nice transition, by the way. That is how you do a nice transition, right? Obviously the light is sort of enveloping the viewer, right? And then it cuts to the back. Definitely a lot better of doing it that way than just a sharp cut. We obviously have the light sort of engulf the camera, and then the enemy flies into the rocks. Which I will say, them flying into the rocks is, I think, the other part about this that looks the best for sure. Very, very nice job on the rock collision section of this for sure. I think that, funny enough, is actually my favorite part of the Perfect Cell animation is this. And to be fair, that is also because I'm a lot more impressed nowadays by effects and explosions and smoke like that in Dokkan than I am the actual characters. So that was really cool. Alright, so now I believe we move into, yes, Cell actually losing his, parentheses, perfect form, and then actually having the animation. So, of course, we have Cell tired here. This part is really, really short, and I know that this is like a giant transformation, but when I saw this, I was definitely pretty underwhelmed for this section, unfortunately. I do like the breathing. The breathing looks very, very good. I think that they did a good job, like, sort of representing that. Obviously, his wings would be moving because they're attached to the top of his back. This part is easily my favorite, though. I know this is going to become a meme coming up here soon, especially when these units release. But yeah, obviously we have the scream. And then this section, I don't know, man. Like, the expanding part looks okay. But this part is so jarring to me because, like, not where he whips his head forward, like, kind of a little bit. And I know that it is supposed to look goofy because obviously his head is almost, like, too big for his body at this part, which is ironic considering how big his chest is. But I feel like the assets for his head don't really match up with the assets for his body. I don't know if it's a thing of, like, the head looks to be higher quality. Here, I think you can really see it, right? Like, I feel like they didn't give the head enough to make it feel like an actual head. And to me, it just looks like a PNG that they're sliding up and down the body. Which, I mean, they are, right? But even when I see this in motion, I'm like, ooh, that head does not look great. Like, I don't know. I wish they would have maybe given you some perspective on the change of, like, his head maybe taking a little bit of a different angle. But yeah, like, even here, right? His head looks almost like it was just pasted on in Photoshop, right? Like, I feel like it doesn't look correct for some reason. That's really what makes this section jarring. I think the key looks good. I think his body, in terms of like the way that it's supposed to look, looks good. But I feel like his head is just very disconnected from the entire animation, which, so every time I see this, I end up just looking at the head like it just looks so out of place. Alright, so obviously then we move into the buff cell animation where he lands on the ground. I think this section is definitely fine. They go to the card art really quickly, but obviously that's because this animation is so short, right? And then we have a move forward. I think that the jump actually looks pretty cool. Ooh, okay, so we have some interesting, like, changes in the pose here, too. Obviously, we go from the wind-up to this immediately, which is kind of weird that he's like farther away almost. That's kind of what it looks like before he sort of expands again and then throws the punch again. Wish there was a little bit more in between in the middle. This section though, I will say I definitely like the snappy movements here, right? Where he actually is like bringing his foot around, right, to take a step. I think that that is really cool. And then obviously throwing a punch from the other side again. Definitely a very good look. And then obviously we have the beat down here. So I think for the most part they got this animation pretty good. Where obviously where there needs to be snappy movements there is. Sometimes I just wish that there was a little bit more in between. I will say for this final punch, I do feel like it doesn't have a crazy amount of impact, and I almost kind of wish that there was more in between, ironically enough, for this final one. I think that Cell himself looks pretty good throughout this whole thing, which is kind of funny considering this is like somehow even more ugly than Imperfect Cell. But I definitely think Cell looks good. This animation just feels a little bit awkward, and I suppose that also could be, unfortunately, due to the sprite, because obviously the sprite sort of takes away from a lot of like the correct angles that you could do of how he's supposed to be getting punched, right? Because obviously here, right, this definitely does not look correct in terms of the pose that Gohan should be in as he's getting hit into the ground here. And it's kind of funny that they just have his arm up in the air like, help me! But yeah, I think that one's maybe more of the sprite's fault, unfortunately, that makes it look a little bit jarring too. Key looks really good here though, and I think that they definitely nailed the sort of Cell Saga style, even though the key is just like two PNGs moving back and forth. I think in motion it looks fine. Alright, so that is Mr. Cell's animations. I thought I looped this, huh? Well, either way, we'll just loop it manually. Thank you guys so much for watching today's video. Definitely don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed. Let me know what you thought of these animations in the comment section below. I think for me, my overall final thoughts on this is that I definitely like Semi-Perfect Cell and Imperfect Cell's animations a lot more than I do the Perfect Cell animations, which is kind of funny because obviously this is supposed to be like a Perfect Cell card. I don't know. Maybe it's just because I feel like they put more effort into those. They cut a little bit less corners with that one. And maybe it's also just because with Perfect Cell himself, right? Obviously, there is a lot less to take from in terms of the animations because we already have so many Perfect Cell cards that they definitely, like, you know, have basically exhausted most of his attacks by now. And obviously we don't have that many semi-perfect or imperfect Cell cards. So maybe that's just kind of the reason why I feel this way about this card. Overall, I'm pretty satisfied with it. I just kind of wish they would have done a little bit more with Perfect Cell. But again, let me know what you guys thought in the comments section below. Of course, let me know if you plan on summoning for this unit. And other than that, I will catch you guys in the next one. Dokkan Assets out. Peace.